Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Felicia Simpson. I am an associate professor in the mathematics department. I'm a professor of statistics. My background is biostatistics. And so today I'll be discussing with you an examination of frailty as measured by a deficit accumulation approach in older African Americans with diabetes. So this is a study using the Jackson Heart study. So I know I got students on the call as well as faculty members. So for my people who are interested in hip hop music and rap music, maybe you can help me out here. So we have this concept of accelerated biological aging. So my students on the call in the chat, who is this guy, right? So think to yourself, who is that guy? So I know everybody knows who that guy is. And then you look over here, who is that guy? All right. So when you think to yourself, so this is Jay-Z, right? Here, and then we have Lil Wayne. So if you think about it, who's older? All right, when you look at these pictures, who's older? So Jay-Z is actually older, he's 51. And Lil Wayne is younger, he's 38. So you have this concept, right, of accelerated aging versus biological aging. And accelerated aging versus accelerated biological aging versus chronological aging. So just to set the scene, chronological aging is your age from birth. Biological aging is the active rate in which your body is aging over time. So when you look at these pictures, right, biologically, Lil Wayne is older. Chronologically, Jay-Z is older. So like biologically, what makes Lil Wayne look the way he is, right? What makes him age at a faster rate. And it has to do with lifestyle, right? So a lot of lifestyle factors can make us age at an accelerated age biologically. And so here's the problem then. So as we go older, we all are gonna develop multiple conditions and diseases that are associated with aging. So now you have the aging of the population coupled with this epidemic of obesity, and it has led to this rapid increase of older obese individuals who have diabetes. So obesity and diabetes are often described as these accelerators of biological aging. Other things that we know are that the prevalence of diabetes is projected to increase, actually double by 2050. And then it's estimated about 13% of non-Hispanic Blacks age 20 and older have diabetes, and that they are almost twice as likely to have diabetes compared to non-Hispanic whites. And then you have mortality, and the mortality rate is about 1.5 higher, and the medical cost is about 2 times higher in individuals who are diabetic versus not diabetic. So like, how do we measure accelerated biological aging? So there have been so many attempts, right, across decades to develop a measurable construct for this accelerated biological aging. And I'll just name a few. Some of them include clinical routine visits, epigenetics, functional measures, multi-morbidity, and statistical parameterization related to disability and survival. So another measurable construct of frailty that you guys may have heard of is called a frailty phenotype. So, and let me define what frailty is. So frailty is a state of increased vulnerability to adverse outcomes, in particular mortality. So frailty phenotype was developed by Dr. Leonard Fried that says an individual is frail if they have 3 or more of the 5 characteristics, being shrinking, weakness, poor endurance, slowness, and low physical activity. Now, if an individual just had 1 or 2 of these characteristics, they were put in this what we call a pre-frail state. And if they didn't have any, they were considered to be not frail. So there's been like this talk of using frailty to actually measure this whole accelerated biological aging. Now, when we think about frailty in the context of African Americans, so actually the prevalence of frailty in African Americans is higher than compared to whites. And also when you think about like functional and disability impairment it's also more common in African Americans than white. But the problem is there's very limited research regarding frailty in African Americans who also have diabetes. What we've seen is we know that prior studies, there's a lot of literature out there that frailty is a predictor of mortality and other adverse outcomes. But the consequences of frailty and the prevalence of frailty in African Americans who are obese and have diabetes is not well described. Now, another measurable construct of frailty, which is what this research is about, is deficit accumulation approach. So the idea here is deficit accumulation indices are basically used to serve as a marker of how quickly an individual is aging biologically. And so sometimes you'll hear the term frailty indices, which are same thing as a deficit accumulation indices. And that the index is just designed to be a little bit more sensitive to aging across many pathways. Now you may be like, well, what is a deficit? Okay, so a deficit can be a lot of things. It can be a sign, a symptom, a disease, a disability, a laboratory result, and it's actually a ratio, right? So you think about a ratio, just think about it as a fraction, right? So it's a ratio of the total deficit score divided by the total deficits considered. So the idea here is that there's no literature regarding using this deficit accumulation approach to measure frailty in African Americans who have type 2 diabetes. So there's no literature in even a metric that is more sensitive to the consequences of aging with type 2 diabetes. So, I mentioned the index being a ratio. So I'm a visual learner, so I kind of just like to show people. So when you think about the fraction, right? So the index is the total index. The index is going to be the total deficit score. So let's say you go into the doctor's office and you do your annual evaluations. We always get those, right? And so you would either get like questions asked or you would get like laboratory results. And each of those items could be a deficit. So that's your total deficits considered is your denominator. Your numerator are going to be your scores based off those total deficits. So let's say your score from that 40 is a 10. So then your index approach, your frailty index score would be 0.25. Now, the higher the score, that means the worse off you are, right? So that means that the more things that are wrong with you. So what we want to do with this study was to use the Jackson-Hart study, which is a large longitudinal study to examine the prevalence of frailty in African Americans, actually older African Americans who have type 2 diabetes. So the frailty index was modeled after a previously designed frailty index, which I created in the Action for Health and Diabetes trial. Now the index includes both self-reported responses and clinical measurements. The index also includes additional measurements we thought would be more sensitive to the consequences of aging with obesity and type 2 diabetes. So for our index, we obviously had to create the index. And once we did we will plan to do a lot of different statistical methods, but just one of the things that we did was first we had to create the index, and we used some t-tests and analysis of variance to just kind of look at the differences between the index among subgroups. Some of the future stuff that we're going to be doing is looking at some survival analysis. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the Jackson-Hart study. So the Jackson-Hart study was initiated in 1998. Some of you students on the call probably wasn't even born yet, but it was in 1998, and it was a longitudinal study, right? And it looked at genetic and environmental risk factors associated with the burden of cardiovascular disease among African Americans. It was a prospective study, so it had a little over about 5,300 people. The age range was 35 to 84, and this was conducted in Jackson, Mississippi. So it's a very popular study. You guys may have heard of it before. With that study, they had 3 examination visits. Majority of our data comes from examination 2 and 3. And with these examination visits, it was just your typical medical history, physical exam, urine analysis, physical activity, income kind of questions. So just to kind of give you a little bit breakdown of our data itself. So we use data from exam 2 and 3 to create our frailty index. So of that 5,306 individuals that were in the study, about 3,918 participated in that visit 2 and 3.
You have about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Of that, we wanted to use we wanted to only evaluate the index in individuals that had at least about 75% of the components available, and they were 40 plus years of age. So that our analytical sample ended up being 1,697. And of those individuals, we also wanted to only look at individuals who were pre-diabetic or diabetic. And so that ended up being 1,339. So when we constructed our deficit accumulation index, remember that it's modeled after the health and diabetes trial. So our index included 34 components, and these components were both based off of self-reported measurements and self-reported responses and clinical measurements. So I always like to kind of give people an idea of the scoring scheme and how we calculated this index. So these are just some of the items of the 34. So remember, for each item, you're going to get a score. So we basically had to code in a score for each item. Creating a new variable for each item. So for example, if the question says self-reported health, based on the individual response, they would get a score. So if they said excellent, they get a score of 0. They said good, score 0.33, poor 0.67, fair 0.67, and then poor 1. So each response was based on the severity of the condition, meaning the worse you are, that score is gonna be closer to 1. The more you're doing better, that score is gonna be closer to 0. So we did that for all 34 items. And I just want to give you a synopsis of what is included in our index. So it has general health, functional measures, mood effects, depression, work, activities of daily living, lifestyle behaviors, a lot of age-related chronic diseases and biomarkers, pain, cognitive ability. And so I'm not going to read all of them, but this is like a snapshot of like some of our items that we use for the index. And again, they're all a combination of self-reported and clinical measurements. So just to give you some results. So this table here represents the differences in the deficit accumulation index among subgroups. And as you can see, what we're seeing here. So this table here is just all that 1600. We didn't, I looked at it both in the 1600, but also in the people that are diabetic or pre-diabetic. So among the all the participants, what we're seeing here is that individuals who have a higher frailty index score are going to be your older individuals. Female people who are obese have a higher HbA1c, who are using insulin, have a history of coronary disease, have hypertension, and a history of cardiovascular disease. And similarly, now this is the subset of individuals who are pre-diabetic and diabetic, and they all stop off gate have a higher frailty index scores compared to the general population. But you're still seeing similar here that people who have this higher score are older, female, obese, higher HbA1c, higher history of cardiovascular disease, higher hypertension. So what the future work is, now we're going to assess whether the predictability of our measure. So we're going to create a categorical response, a categorical variable for this index. So this is going to break individuals up into groups as frail, pre-frail, or not frail based on this index. And then we're going to evaluate how well this index predicts mortality, all-cause mortality, and other adverse outcomes. And we're going to use some Cox proportional hazard models to do that. We're also going to see whether these frailty groups predict mortality significantly different from each other. And we're going to use rate tests for censored survival data. I want to thank my research assistants. They were so amazing. They have worked so hard, you all, we literally got this data maybe March or late February. So we've done so much work in creating the index and also just getting some preliminary results. So they've worked extremely hard, and I'm very proud of them. And we're looking forward to looking at the survival analysis of this. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson. This is very, very interesting. And I'm so grateful that you managed to accomplish quite a lot within only that short period of time. I'm sure that Alexis, Michaela, and Jonathan has a lot to give the credit for, right? Yeah,
they do.
As well. So any question for Dr. Simpson?
I have a question. So I have a question. You're going to be working on this all summer long, right? To get more data, or I don't know how it's going to work getting the additional results that you need for the frailty, and if you include like bone density or something, I can't remember the other frailty.
So I have, it would actually be interesting to look at the connection between frailty and bone density, because I know there was a Sarcopenia, right? And so I mean, if they have bone density measurements, we could actually look at, because it's not a component of the index, but we could look at frailty in bone density and how that may change based on the individual's frailty index score. What we plan to do next is just look at like take this index, put it in like categories based on like frail, pre-frail, and not frail, and actually look at like cause of death, like are individuals who are in certain groups more at risk for like stroke or certain heart diseases. So the data has a lot of like adverse outcome section, and so we're just gonna kind of look at that and see what like what are people more at risk of with a higher index score.
Okay. And will the students be working over the summer?
So they all have landed internships elsewhere.
Okay.
And so we want to definitely encourage them to they'll be at Wake Forest, Carnegie Mellon, and University of Illinois. So they're very hot commodity right now, but they will work up until they leave for the internships, and we will continue our work this fall.